Hi, I'm Gordon from Camera Labs, and this is the Sony Alpha A7r IV, a full-frame mirrorless camera with 61 megapixels, 10 frames per second shooting, 4K video up to 30p, built-in stabilization, and a composite mode that combines 16 frames to generate images with up to 240 megapixels. It's the successor to the A7r III launched 2 years previously, and it costs $3,500 or pounds for the body alone. Superficially, the A7r IV appears to simply be a higher resolution version of the Mark III, with the headline feature being the new 61 megapixel sensor with broader autofocus coverage in the updated pixel shift mode, potentially boosting the resolution further. Beyond support for eye detection and a new digital microphone interface in the hot shoe, there's no upgrades for videographers in terms of resolution, frame rate or bit depth, all updates presumably being held back for the long-awaited successor to the A7s Mark II. But the A7r IV is more than just the A7r III with a high-resolution sensor and digital microphone interface. There's a number of important tweaks to the body that become apparent once you start using the camera, and in this video I'll detail everything that's new and important from the headline features to the less obvious tweaks. I'll start with the body, which again at first glance appears to be identical to the Mark III A7s, but Sony claims improved weather sealing, and if you look closely, a few small but useful adjustments become apparent. Most obviously, the exposure compensation dial now has a long overdue locking button, a feature I'm personally very pleased to see, as I would often turn it by accident when pulling previous models out of a tight bag. It's locked by a ballpoint pen style button, unlike the mode dial lock button which needs to be held down while turning. Would you prefer them to use the same locking mechanism for consistency? Then there's the buttons, which are larger and more tactile than before, not to mention a new joystick, which all felt better to me personally. I've always said a small body doesn't have to have small controls, so I'm delighted to find Sony thinking more about usability, although they haven't quite gone as far as Panasonic has to equip the body with backlit buttons for easier viewability in dark conditions. The rear thumb wheel's also now been repositioned on top of the body, which, to my hands anyway, falls more naturally under my thumb than before. On my early test sample, the dial itself turned a little bit too smoothly for my own liking, but I believe mass production samples will be clickier. Sony's also increased the distance between the inner grip and the lens mount, reducing the chance of your fingers being pinched. Now, I don't have particularly big hands, but the earlier Mark III bodies could feel a little tighter than even I'd like between the grip and lens, so a bit of extra space is very welcome for all of us. There's also changes behind the flaps. Everyone appreciated the dual memory card slots on the previous models, but rightly criticised Sony for only allowing one of them to exploit the extra speed of UHS 2 cards. Now I'm pleased to report the A7r IV fixes that with a pair of proper UHS 2 slots, although this really should have been the case on previous bodies, especially the A9, right? The hot shoe can still be used to mount flashes and other accessories, but now debuts new pins to support a new digital microphone accessory. This new ECM B1M shotgun microphone has its own analog to digital converter built in, allowing it to process the audio for different patterns and noise reduction before then sending the signal digitally to the camera without any cables or even batteries to worry about. I'm hoping to find this updated hot shoe on all new Sony cameras going forward, and I'll show you how the new mic sounds later on in this video. Behind a flap on the left hand side you'll find the same wired connectivity as before, a 3.5mm analog microphone input and headphone output, mini HDMI and a pair of USB ports using micro and C connectors. These allow you to tether and power the camera over USB at the same time. In terms of wireless, there's still Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, but the latter now includes 5 GHz transmission, and the camera can also now be woken for image transfer by Bluetooth if desired. The A7r IV is powered by the same Z-series battery as the Mark III bodies, with a quoted life of 500 to 600 shots, but in practice I found I could achieve a lot more, especially when shooting bursts. With the Z battery, Sony gave its mirrorless cameras some of the longest lifespans around, and again you can always charge and power over USB if necessary. There's also the optional VG C4EM grip, which allows you to use 2 batteries to double the life. In an expected move for a high-end camera, but a welcome one nonetheless, Sony's upgraded the Viewfinder to a higher resolution 5.76 million dot OLED panel with 0.78 times magnification that looks absolutely gorgeous in use. It's the same panel resolution seen on the Lumix S and GFX 100 bodies, and like those models resolves a massive amount of detail and is a boon for manual focusing. Expect all new high-end mirrorless cameras to use this panel going forward. The screen's much the same as before though, a 3-inch panel which can angle up by just over 90 degrees or down by just under 45, allowing you to shoot comfortably at waist height or above heads, but still not flipping forward in any way to face you, nor angling out even a little to the side for easier framing in the portrait orientation, like say Fujifilm's X-T3. More annoyingly though, Sony still hasn't enhanced its touch interface over earlier models, so there's actually very little you can do by touch. You can tap to reposition the AF area for stills or to pull focus while filming, but the function menu with its large friendly icons remains unforgivably non-tappable, as does the entire main menu system. Meanwhile, in playback, the camera ignores years of smartphone functionality by not responding to swipes or pinches, and only pays attention when you double tap to enlarge the image, after which you can at least push the image around. Sony really needs to look at Canon, Panasonic, Fujifilm, Olympus, well, pretty much everyone else in the market to see what can be achieved with touchscreens, although you can of course navigate conventionally using the joystick and buttons. In happier news, the Mark IV gets long overdue interval timer facilities built into the main menu system itself. Eagle-eyed Sony followers will recall its previous generation lost the interval timer facilities when the downloadable Play Memories apps were abandoned. I still like some kind of bulb timer though, or directly being able to access long shutter speeds for long exposures. Right, now it's time to talk about autofocus. The new sensor sports a larger and denser autofocus array than before. The previous A7r Mark II and III offered 399 phase detect points spread over around 45% of the frame, concentrated in an area in the middle. The new A7r Mark IV increases this to 567 phase detect points, but spread across 74% of the frame in a roughly square area that covers essentially the entire frame vertically and 74% of it horizontally. That is a much bigger area for which you'll enjoy that more confident autofocus system. And if you switch the camera to cropped APS-C mode, you'll enjoy a still pretty respectable 325 points covering the entire frame, while still having enough resolution remaining to deliver 26 megapixel images. The AF system works at apertures down to f11 and at light levels of -3 EV fitted with an f2 lens, while also inheriting the latest real-time tracking and real-time eye autofocus for both humans and animals. Sony does this better than anyone else, and like other recent alphas with the technology, it'll confidently identify and track eyes from much longer distances than most rivals, and is an absolute joy to see and use in action. Indeed, it's so good it's possible to trust it for pretty much most of the time to make the best decision based on the subject, face and eye recognition. I really feel Sony's got to a point where you rarely need to actually overrule the autofocus system for general and even fairly advanced use. Eye detection with continuous autofocus is also finally available in movies, and here's an example of it in practice using the 24-70mm f2.8 at f2.8. As you'd expect, it works well, although I'm not quite sure why it wasn't available in previous models. As a Sony camera, the A7r Mark IV doesn't slouch on speed just because it's the high-resolution model in the range, shooting at the same 10 frames per second mechanical maximum as its predecessor, but now having to handle bigger files with improved autofocus for bursts lasting up to 68 superfine JPEGs or compressed RAW files. Here's a sequence showing the speed of 10 frames per second with eye detection locking onto the subject as soon as his face was visible. Here's another sequence with continuous autofocus easily tracking an approaching cyclist. It also works well tracking other YouTubers, thanks for the expert run Jordan, and we'll see him again later in the video in slow motion. The bottom line is the A7r Mark IV may be sold on high resolution, but thanks to its confident autofocus, fast bursts and broader autofocus coverage, it's also a very capable camera for sports, action and wildlife, while there's plenty of opportunity for cropping while retaining loads of detail. Moving on to video, the specs remain essentially the same as the A7r Mark III, albeit with the benefit of the new microphone interface and eye detection. So, as before, you can film 4K at 24, 25 or 30p, all uncropped when using the full frame mode, or cropped in the Super 35 mode. And like its predecessor, the best results on this model are when filming in Super 35, although the camera now oversamples from 6K's worth of data compared to 5K's worth on the Mark III. Coincidentally, the A6400 also oversamples from 6K's worth of data. Also note, when filming 4K video on the A7r Mark IV in its Super 35 mode, 24p footage applies a 1.6 times crop versus a slightly tighter 1.8 times crop if you choose 30p. To compare the quality, I filmed this scene in both the full frame and Super 35 4K modes at 24p, adjusting the zoom to match the field of view. I put the full frame footage in the top half of the screen and the Super 35 footage in the bottom half. Which do you prefer the look of? There's also 1080p up to 60p, or in a high frame rate 120p mode with sound and autofocus that can be slowed by 4 times in a 30p timeline, or by 5 times in a 24p timeline, as I'm doing here. Most rivals now offer 1080 video up to 120p, but generally without autofocus and without sound, and they also normally interpret the footage in camera to play back in slow motion whether you like it or not. By supporting sound, focus, and letting you choose the playback speed later on in the edit, the Sony's high frame rate 1080 is simply so much more flexible, allowing you to punch between slow motion and normal speed on the same clip. If you're into grading, there's the usual array of picture profiles including S-Log 2 and 3, both now working at a more usable base sensitivity of 500 ISO, along with HLG for in-camera HDR. Sadly though, there's still no 10-bit nor 4K at 60p, features presumably waiting for the next A7S body, so if they're important to you today in a full-frame body, check out Panasonic's Lumix S series. Sony's face detection for movies is one of the best around, only rivaled by Canon's dual pixel AF models, and now enjoying the added benefit of eye detection. Here it effortlessly keeps me focused as I walk right up to the camera. Indeed, it's so good you can confidently use it for filming pieces to camera even if you can't actually see where you are on the screen. So, without further ado, it's time for some vlogging, but this time I've swapped brightness lanes for the New York High Line at night. Hello, I'm Gordon from Camera Labs, and this is a quick vlogging test with the Sony A7r IV. I'm filming this in 4K 24p using the full frame mode, so I can go nice and wide with the 24 to 70mm G Master at 24mm f2.8. And I have face and eye detection enabled, eye detection being new for movies on this model. So hopefully my face is in focus. I say hopefully because I can't actually see myself because the screen still doesn't flip over the top or out to the side to face you, sad face, or any face, I don't know, I can't see it. But I can hear this gentleman playing this rather magnificent instrument, so perhaps I'll shut up and let you listen to him. And now, on with the rest of the review. As you know, the A7r IV debuts new pins in the hot shoe to work with an equally new digital microphone. Now, I filmed a separate video demonstrating all of the different modes on this microphone, but here's a brief taster, starting with the built-in microphones and followed by the new microphone in its super directional mode with digital noise reduction enabled. Let me know which one you prefer the sound of. Starting off, for reference, here's a clip filmed using the camera's built-in microphones. This is the Sony A7r IV. I'm walking in a fairly echoey corridor with some music playing in the room that's now behind me, so it's probably hearing a lot more of that than me. No bad thing, but let's see if we can do better with the new microphone. Okay, so I'm sticking with the super directional pattern, but now I've switched to noise cancelling on. So it's using the microphone's DSP technology to try and filter out some of the sound that's around me. Let's see how well it deals with the music that's going on in the room that's now behind me. And it is quite echoey, there's people talking, so it's quite a noisy environment. If this works well, then this could be an ideal microphone for anyone filming pieces to camera in a variety of environments. And finally, for this video section, here's some clips showing the noise at high ISO sensitivities when filming 4K in low light at 24p. First starting at 6400 ISO, now at 12800 ISO, now at 25600 ISO, and finally at the maximum 4K movie sensitivity of 32000 ISO. Right, let's get on to the sensor and photo quality. After 2 generations of using the same 42 megapixel sensor, Sony's equipped the A7r IV with a brand new 61 megapixel back illuminated full frame sensor which leapfrogs its rivals. Prior to the Mark IV, there were high resolution full frame options for most of Sony's rivals, sporting up to 50 megapixels, but now Sony takes the resolution lead in the full frame market. For now anyway, I wouldn't be surprised if there's some extra high resolution bodies in the pipeline from its rivals. As before, the sensor is stabilised within the body using the same 5-axis system as the Mark III with up to 5.5 stops of compensation. You'll still have to shoot carefully if you want to exploit the full resolution, but the stabilization certainly helps a great deal, and for me it really is a great benefit when you're composing at longer focal lengths. The A7R Mark IV's images sport 9504 by 6336 pixels compared to 7952 by 5304 pixels on the A7R Mark III and II. So that's roughly 1500 extra pixels horizontally and 1000 extra vertically, allowing you to output 5 inches wider at 300 dpi. That's obviously a great benefit to those making very large prints or who need to crop into subjects, but I wanted to see how much of a difference there was between the new and old models and whether the finer pixel pitch compromised noise levels. So I photographed this still life scene with both cameras using the same lens at every ISO value, using identical exposures, and processed the RAW files using Adobe Camera Raw with very high sharpening and zero noise reduction. Now you wouldn't normally turn off noise reduction and boost the sharpening this much, but I've done it here to reveal exactly what's going on behind the scenes and to see how much real information is available to work with. I'll present crops from the area indicated by the red rectangle with the A7R Mark III on the left, and the A7R Mark IV on the right. From 50 to 400 ISO, I'd say the A7R Mark IV crops on the right show a visible increase in detail over the A7R Mark III crops on the left, particularly in the leaves. But even at 400 ISO, you'll notice an increase in noise levels, particularly in flat areas like the petals on the Mark IV, which become more apparent as the sensitivity increases. Indeed, by 1600 ISO, I'd say the noise on the A7R Mark IV has eliminated any detail benefit it has over the A7R Mark III, placing them on a similar level. While at the highest values, you could possibly argue that the Mark III actually looks a little bit better, although by this point, neither are looking great, are they? To be honest, this sort of result is expected as the pixel pitch on the Mark IV is of course finer than its predecessors, but it does illustrate that if you want or need the benefit of the higher 61 megapixel resolution over the Mark III or II, you should try to shoot at 400 ISO or below. I know a lot of you also like to see noise levels in low light, so here's another sequence with the A7R Mark IV throughout its entire ISO range, but this time I'm comparing out-of-camera JPEGs on the left with RAW files processed using the same settings as earlier on the right, so high sharpening and zero noise reduction. The crops are again taken from the area marked with the red rectangle, and again out-of-camera JPEGs are going to be on the left and processed RAW files on the right, and both of these images are from the A7R Mark IV. Here I'd say the A7R Mark IV's JPEG engine is doing a good job at managing noise, delivering clean images up to around 1600 ISO with minimal loss of detail. At 3200 ISO and beyond though, the finest details begin to smudge through noise reduction, and the benefit of those 61 megapixels is unsurprisingly lost. So again, to maximise the potential of that new sensor, try to stick to the lowest sensitivities that you can. If 61 megapixels aren't enough for you, the upgraded pixel shift mode can potentially quadruple it to 240, at least in numbers if not actual detail. Pixel shift made its Sony debut on the previous A7R Mark III, where it took 4 shots that were then combined in software on your computer later to effectively eliminate the Bayer colour filter array on the sensor and increase the colour resolution. Now on the A7R Mark IV, you still need to process pixel shift photos using Sony's Imaging Edge software on your computer later, but a new option exploits the camera's stabilization to nudge the sensor by half a pixel between frames, capturing 16 of them in around 10 seconds, allowing a quadrupling of the total pixels captured. Now don't expect to achieve a quadrupling of actual detail, but the mode certainly has the potential to resolve more than a single 61 megapixel image. You'll also still need a tripod and a static subject for the best results, so think still life, product or archive photography, but it's certainly a considerably cheaper option than going medium format, if it delivers the goods in practice. To find out what you can expect in practice, I took a number of detailed urban landscape shots in the normal 61 megapixel mode, followed by the 16 frame pixel shift version for direct comparison, and I'll show you magnified views of both with a single frame on the left and the pixel shift version on the right. Like other composite modes on rival cameras, the success of pixel shift is highly influenced by the subject and your technique. If either are suboptimal, you're unlikely to see any benefit and may in fact end up with a worse result due to the compositing artifacts. If anything is in motion during the capture, it will be rendered, at least with the version of Imaging Edge that I had access to, as a strange coloured blur. It's not just the obvious things moving like cars, people or birds you have to watch out for, but anything that moves even a little bit in the breeze, including flags and foliage on plants and trees, which is why it works best for interior product or archive work. I also wish Sony allowed you to composite the images in camera like Panasonic, as right now you'll have to find the raw files on your card mixed up with all your other images, before then selecting the required groups of images using Imaging Viewer and Edge, and then waiting a minute or two as they process. But when the mode does succeed, there is a genuine benefit with a small but visible boost in detail and a reduction of colour artifacts. I didn't experience anywhere near 240 megapixels worth of resolution in my own tests, but there was certainly more than 61 in the best ones, and it allows the A7R Mark IV to approach the resolution of much more expensive medium format models. Again, at least for the right subjects and conditions. Before wrapping up, here's a selection of out-of-camera JPEG images I shot with the A7R Mark IV using the 24-70mm f2.8 G Master lens, using its native 61 megapixel quality, and all of these images are available for download via my full review at cameralabs.com. Now, often the difference in detail on new high-resolution sensors is less than you might expect, but on the A7R Mark IV there really is a visible increase in resolution between it and the earlier Marks II and III. So if you need to make really big prints or take really tight crops, then the Mark IV has resolution aplenty to work with. Beyond detail, the processing style is unsurprisingly similar to previous models, which may or may not be to your taste. Some may prefer the approach of rival systems, but you can of course adjust the processing parameters to taste or adjust them later on RAW files. Sony also made claims of 15 stops of dynamic range, coincidentally the same figure quoted for the Mark III, and I'll be testing that in the future for my review at cameralabs.com. Right, now for the final verdict. The A7R Mark IV is an impressive body, bringing resolution improvements to trouble high-res rivals and overall speed and handling that could easily tempt D850 owners. Here's a camera that has the potential to deliver portraits, landscapes, and architectural images that approach medium format quality, while also having the speed and croppability for distant sports and wildlife. I also appreciated Sony's body tweaks, from the roomier grip and larger buttons to the dual UHS 2 slots and the high-resolution viewfinder. I'm still frustrated by the woefully underused touchscreen and disappointed there's no 4K at 60p nor any video in 10-bit, features presumably reserved for an almost mythical A7S upgrade, but the new digital microphone interface and improved autofocus remain valuable upgrades for video shooters, while the oversampled 4K footage in the Super 35 mode certainly looks very good. But if you do want 4K at 60p and 10-bit right now on a full-frame system, have a look at Panasonic's Lumix S bodies. Overall, the A7R Mark IV is an evolutionary upgrade over its predecessor, but it's surprising how much a boost in resolution and autofocus performance has broadened the flexibility and appeal of this model in Sony's lineup, again allowing it to tempt detail fanatics whether their subjects are static or in fast motion. Overall, I'd give it a recommended, although if 42 megapixels are enough for you, then do look out for bargains on the earlier A7R Mark III. Right, that's it for this video. You know what happens next. If you found any of it useful, please give me a like and a follow too. Believe it or not, 3/4 of the people watching my videos do not subscribe, and you guys can really help my channel grow. So do give me a subscribe if you find anything that I do useful. I really appreciate that. And if you really like what I do, of course, you can treat me to a coffee, or you can treat yourself to my in-camera book, and there's links to both of those below, including links to get yourself a Camera Labs t-shirt or to check prices on the Sony A7R Mark IV. Right, I hope you enjoyed that. I'll see you next time, and don't forget to let me know what you think of this new camera in the comments below. See you next time. Bye bye.